Good evening, Gators. Welcome to Accent's final week collaborating with Black Student Union and Pride Student Union for tonight's event. My name is Stephen Wolf, and I'm honored to serve the University of Florida as chairman of Accent Speakers Bureau. For 54 years, Accent has stuck to its tradition of bringing prominent, influential, and entertaining speakers to campus to engage and inform the student body. Tonight, although we are not together on campus, we are incredibly proud to continue that tradition by bringing speakers who can inspire and further educate us on the issues of racial injustice facing our country. Before I continue, I'd like to take a moment to remind our audience that no recording of any kind is permitted during tonight's event, including photography, screenshots, video recording, and live streaming. The show will consist of a moderated conversation followed by a 15-minute student Q&A session. We ask that students keep their questions brief and respectful, as we would like to give as many students as possible the chance to ask their questions. Questions can be asked at any time throughout the show using the Microsoft Teams Q&A feature, but no, they won't be answered until the Q&A session begins. If you'd like your question to be asked to a specific speaker, we advise you include their name in your question. Tonight's show will be moderated by Dr. Jasmine McNeely. Dr. McNeely is a professor in the School of Journalism and the Associate Director of the Marion D. Brechner First Amendment Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to issues affecting the First Amendment freedoms of speech, press, thought, assembly, and petition. Please welcome Dr. Jasmine McNeely. Now, on to tonight's featured guests. Since Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi started the hashtag Black Lives Matter in 2013 in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, their impassioned message has seamlessly shifted from the internet into the streets and the mainstream, while maintaining its online clout and widespread allure. Emblazoned across t-shirts, protest banners, and news headlines, hashtag Black Lives Matter has turned attention to the troubling disconnect between law enforcement and the Black community, driving nationwide protests on a scale not seen in a half century. With a vision of justice for all, the Black Lives Matter founders engage audiences in discussion about race relations in America and how their activism from the fringes became the national movement it is today, galvanizing individuals to stand up together against the state violence, police brutality, and social injustice plaguing our country. Gators, please give a warm virtual welcome to the creators of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi.
So I am just really happy to be able to talk to you all. I think there's going to be a good discussion. So Patrisse, Alicia, Opal, welcome to the swamp, so to speak. A few questions. So Patrisse, why Black Lives Matter?
Ooh, I like. Well, I want to just say, hey, everybody. So grateful to be here. And while it's still very bizarre to do big public speaking events on a computer and in my living room, I am grateful to be doing it with this team and this time. I think, Black Lives Matter because so much of the work that we've done over the last decade has been about being unafraid to say the word Black, being unafraid to position ourselves as a community that is desperately in need of reinvestment, and being unafraid to fight like hell for our lives and to show up for us. There is a power in Black Lives Matter that is reminiscent of the Black Power movement. And we are honored to have ushered in a new conversation alongside hundreds, and I argue thousands of other Black leaders around the globe.
So just to follow up with that, what are the goals, Alicia, for Black Lives Matter?
Well, our goals have always been to reestablish the dignity and humanity of Black people all over the world. And we've been very explicit from the very beginning that Black Lives Matter is a call for humanization, right? I think the other piece of it, frankly, is trying to intervene in whatever interrupts the ability of Black people to live in our full dignity. And policing, and a system and a series of punishment-based, right, policies that that deny Black people our dignity, right, and our humanity. But it is also about other forms of state-sanctioned violence that essentially rob Black communities of the things that we need to live well and to live whole. And so, you know, the violence that exists that Black communities face and that we experience is not just at the barrel of a gun, right? It also has everything to do with, you know, our communities being at the losing end of almost every disparity that you can think of, whether that's healthcare or housing, jobs, education. Black communities are not only being left behind, but we are essentially being attacked by a lack of access to the resources that we need to live full and dignified lives.
Mm-hmm. So, Alicia, it seems like what you're talking about is equity and justice. So what does that look like in the work of Black Lives Matter?
Well, it looks like, first, it looks like organizing, right? And so, you know, one of the things that has been so important to the three of us is that, you know, that we round out how we understand what is necessary for Black lives to matter. We need a change in our criminal system. In fact, we need to completely revamp it. We need a change in our kind of our immigrant rights system, right? Where immigrants don't actually have rights in this country. We need a change in all of the things that are impacting our communities. And one thing that's important for people to know is that, you know, Black Lives Matter spans the range of issues that Black communities cares about, and we organize and build power to make sure that we are changing laws and also changing culture that allows Black lives to be devalued. I think it also very much is a cultural shift that we have, you know, been very focused on ushering into being. You know, what Patrice said is absolutely right. The fact that you have to be unapologetic to say Black shows you where we are as a culture. And so we really have done work to try and intervene, whether it be through art, whether it be through, you know, prose, whether it be through the images and the stories that we see on TV, like Patrice has been so involved in, and Opal as well. We have to change the ways that Black people are seen, the way that Black people are experienced, and then we also have to change the way we experience and see ourselves and each other. That is very, very important to us. So I know we've heard things like, you know, well, you can't appeal to white people to make Black Lives Matter. And we're like, that's never what this was about in the first place. This is always a project to provide healing between Black people so that we can also achieve unity and take action together to build power.
Mm-hmm. And so, Opal, Alicia mentioned media. What do you think the influence of media, including social media, is in organizing political engagement and ultimately making change related to the work of Black Lives Matter?
Well, I believe that media actually plays a very critical role in how we understand what's happening in society, how we understand our values and our society, as well as how we see ourselves. I would argue that a large part of the reason why we had to create Black Lives Matter in the way that we created Black Lives Matter was because we didn't have a media landscape that was embracing or accurately depicting what was taking place in Black communities. you know, we were faced, and we are still being faced with an onslaught of violence, right? And everyday degradation and just devaluation of Black lives all across the board, as, you know, Alicia began to share. And we didn't have a media landscape that allowed for folks to truly hear what we were going through, nor equip folks with the tools to act on it, right? The tools to remedy the harm that had been happening in our communities. So quite literally, you know, when we first, you know, created Black Lives Matter, it was using social media. We had to use, you know, the tools that were at our disposal, tools that, you know, often they're talked about as democratizing our society. I don't necessarily think that that's all true, because we know that there's a lot of bias and power that still, you know, our social media platforms like Facebook, for example, harbor. However, we were deliberate, we were intentional in utilizing social media channels because we knew that we could be authentic with our own storytelling. We could be authentic in sharing our own concerns, and that we could speak directly to one another, as opposed to, you know, fighting for, you know, an NBC or CNN or so on to cover what was going on. We knew, you know, from day one that this was about us, like speaking first and foremost to Black people, reminding us that our lives matter, despite what the society was saying about us, and despite what the courts were declaring about our lives. And, you know, when we think about Black Lives Matter, right, the inception was because of the murder of Trayvon Martin and the acquittal of his killer, George Zimmerman. But we knew that the media wasn't telling the full story. We knew that, you know, Trayvon and his family weren't getting even a modicum of justice or a real kind of, there was nothing that was coming of it that was any good. And so we knew that we had to take the power, right? We had to seize our power. We had to step into our own sense of agency, and use the tools of our day to communicate another message. And that message being, to us, we know our lives matter, we care about us. And so we're going to do what we need to do to ensure that we have different types of outcomes throughout all of our systems, and that we're going to transform them in order to finally have a world where our lives truly matter. So media is critical to that, you know, both the traditional sense of media, but also, of course, new media tools, being able to use our cell phones to record what's going on. That's obviously another critical component where people are empowered to document what's taking place in their own communities, document the harms, the challenges, the discrimination that they're faced with, and report on it. And I think this is just we're living in a new time. It's really empowering. But I would also just say that our forebears, you know, people who came before us, always used the media, right? They always knew of the centrality of media in terms of educating the public, even agitating the larger public. And, you know, if you look back and look at leaders like Martin Luther King or, you know, others who really took the press quite seriously. You know, I think about Ida B. Wells, who was documenting, and, you know, we've always known the power of our own storytelling, and it was always about how do we do it in a way that is most effective, because we know we're right, we know we're righteous, we know what we're doing is on the right side of history. However, having platforms that allow us to share and do the work that we so critically need to get done was the challenging part. And so, you know, glad that we're living in this time, glad that we were able to seize the tools that are at our disposal, seize the tools of our day. It was always about using the online tools to take action in our lives offline.
So 7 years post 2013, there have been various periods of unrest that have been documented using social media, cell phones, traditional media. Is this time different from other periods of unrest, Patrice?
Absolutely. Absolutely different. And I ground that in a lot of things. One, we are 7 years wiser. We've learned a lot in these 7 years. And when we started Black Lives Matter, while yes, we wanted to reach the edges of the earth, we didn't realize it would. We also didn't realize that we would be at the center of some major attacks. We didn't realize that we were going to have end up having the president that we had, and we were going to have. So we learned a lot in these 7 years. It's also important to recognize that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and our work is part of a long legacy, 400-year fight for freedom. And there are ebbs and flows, and there's openings and closures. And the last 4 years, what we've seen is a lot of despair because of the national government, neglect, abuse, torture. And for these last several months, we witnessed a president completely neglect communities under a global pandemic and allow for people to suffer more than they had already been suffering. And so when we see a video of a human being calling for their last breaths, an entire community, Minneapolis, made the decision that it was done. They weren't going to do this anymore, even in the middle of a pandemic, that they were going to challenge the status quo. And they called us all back from our slumber and brought us back into the streets, not just here in the United States, but across the globe. And so this moment is such an important moment in history because we are living under known white supremacists. We are living in a moment where the undocumented community, trans folks, queer folks, Black folks, disabled folks, sick folks have been tried to be written out of history by this human being and his administration. And now what you're seeing is a collective sense of rage, outrage, a collective sense of love, and a collective sense of we know who we need to get out of office. We know what our marching orders are, while we also continue to hold people accountable for the things that we need as Black people. So I think we understand more than ever the urgency of this moment. And while we were talking about the moments being urgent under the Obama administration, while we're talking about it being urgent 4.5, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we have seen what it feels and what it smells like and what it tastes like to live under an outwardly white supremacist government. And I think we're all done. I think we're all done. And so this moment is very different. And, in some ways, I'll just close with this. 7 years ago, we warned the country, if we don't show up for Black lives, this is where we're heading. This is where we're heading. We had collectively, not just the three of us, Black leaders had a prophetic vision about where our country was going to go if we didn't check its racism. And it happened in 2016, it happened. It doesn't have to happen again in 2020. We don't have to go down this route again. And I firmly believe that as a country and as a globe, people are interested collectively in getting 45 out of office and making sure we see a new president and holding the next person accountable.
So, Alicia, following up on that, what are some of the lessons that Black Lives Matter has learned that have been put into practice now in comparison to 7 years ago?
Well, there's no following up on that. Yeah, I will step in next.
I love you, girl. You know how I feel about this.
No. So here's the thing. I mean, in terms of concrete lessons, I think that America is relearning the things that we talked about 7 years ago. When we talk about, the need to not leave anybody behind when we're talking about Black lives and whose lives matter. And of course, over this last couple of months, we've seen so many murders of various people at the hands of police and vigilantes, Tony McDade, Breonna, right? All of these folks who, really defy, I think, how media talked about Black Lives Matter. If you left it up to mainstream media, people would say, oh, well, Black Lives Matter is a movement that is trying to interrupt the killings of cisgender Black men by police. And actually, I think what we've seen, right, even over the last few months, is that people have had to be reminded, right, that Black folks are not a monolith, and that Black people are being killed if you're a citizen or if you're not a citizen, if you're, cisgender, transgender, if you identify as man, woman, whatever. If you're Black in this country, you are not assured life. And that is a major lesson that I think folk are relearning right now. I also think that, frankly, I've called this a moment of reckoning. And, I think we're seeing ways in which everything is being disrupted as part of the lessons from what you need to do to make Black Lives Matter that weren't being done before. So people may have had signs in their windows, they might have bought a t-shirt, right? But now all of a sudden it's going into C-suites in companies. How come we don't have any Black people in the C-suite? If Black lives really matter, it's not enough to put out a statement. We actually need to change who's in leadership, right? We need to value Black intellect. We need to value Black contributions, and we need to put our money where our mouths are. I recently learned, for example, that, Twitter, which Black people, frankly, Black Twitter, I think is, a monument of this decade. And frankly, in the C-suite at Twitter, there are maybe one, probably none, in terms of Black folks, right, who are in leadership, but yet Black folks are pushing this vehicle forward. I think another lesson that is being put into practice right now is that, every time we get to this point, because this, the way that our society is organized, it is always going to tend towards crisis. That's just a fact. It's so unsustainable, the way in which we have organized ourselves, that we can expect that, sure, every 7 years or even every 3 years or every 3 months, there is going to be a crisis that's a result of the way that we are organized as a country. But the reality is, when we get to these reckoning moments where we ask ourselves, well, what are we going to do differently? So many times we go down this path of, like, the path of least resistance is what I call it. The shortest path between A and B. And so, in 2014, when in response to murders of Black people at the hands of the police, we got things like body cameras, right? We got things like task forces to study the problem. I've had people in my life who have said to me, whenever a task force is designed, it's where good ideas go to die, right? It's like there are all of these ways in which we get, we're so anxious for change that we accept whatever is handed to us. And I think this moment can be different than that. We are seeing across the nation and really across the world a reimagining of what safety and dignity and wellness can look like. We are asking ourselves the question of, what is the role of police and policing in our communities? And is that the role that we want police and policing to play? Is there a role for other functions and professions to actually step in and say, actually to deal with people who don't have homes, you can't deal with that with a badge and a gun. You actually have to figure out how you provide housing. Is there a different way that we can approach this than punishment? That's a lesson that I think we still have yet to see if we're going to learn it or not. Mm-hmm. And Lord knows there are all kinds of short-term solutions that are being offered in this moment. There are all kinds of ways in which people are promising the moon and saying you can get it if you just add water and a little salt and pepper. But the fact of the matter is, right, if we really want to see change, so that we're not watching Black people be murdered on television day after day after day, we have to ask ourselves where we get the courage to actually move into something that we haven't done before. can we also generate and develop the political will to move beyond these very flat, two-dimensional conversations about are police good or police bad? And actually, there's a bigger conversation to be asked here, which is, what do we need to do to ensure the sanctity of Black life? If we're all saying Black Lives Matter, if we got Congress people kneeling and doing all the things, what else can we do to change the rules that have been rigged against Black communities for ever since we were brought here at the bottoms of boats? And then also, what are the cultural changes that we need to continue to usher forward? I'll just say this lastly, but you got me riled up. I'm like, wow, I feel like I need to learn some lessons here. It's interesting because I can't turn on my television now without seeing something about Black Lives Matter. If I want to watch Netflix, I turn on Netflix and it's like, here's how you learn about, what's going on with Black folks. I try to watch my reality TV shows just to escape for a little bit, and I can't escape. Real Housewives of Atlanta is over here talking about Black Lives Matter. Andy Cohen over here talking about white privilege and white guilt and white silence. I'm like, yo. But here's the thing that I'm holding for us right now, and that I want us to all walk away from this conversation with is this just going to be over in August? By August, are we going to have moved on and I can go back to my reality shows and then we never talk about what it means to ensure the dignity and sanctity of Black life? Or are we going to say we never want to be back here again? So here's what we're going to do to get us to new problems that we have to solve, right? I think I'm exhausted, and I know my sisters are too, of trying the same old things and expecting different results. At this point, we have an opportunity to really change not just history, but the present. And then we can look back on this and say, this was the moment where we decided to do something different. And that's what I think the lesson for this moment has in terms of potential. I'm not sure if we've done it yet.
So one of the things that Alicia just said, Opal, that really struck me is about the two-dimensional conversation we continue to have, even with respect to what do we mean when we say Black lives. So my question to you is, what is intersectionality, which I think part of the answer Alicia gave me points to, and what is the role that it plays in the Black Lives Matter movement and in organizing in general?
Well, intersectionality is at the core, I think, of who we are and how we do the work that we do, right? Intersectionality, and I'm not sure if everyone understands the definition or the concept, but really it's just understanding the various ways in which power and our systems interact with different types of people who have various identities, right? So, for example, I'm the daughter of Nigerian immigrants. I think oftentimes about the immigration system and its impact on my family or people that I love who are undocumented. And for us to engage in liberation work and freedom fighting in the ways that we do is to look at the impact of the immigration system and the criminal justice system on identities like Black immigrants or folks who might be undocumented, and to embrace the fact that our unique identities make us either more acutely impacted by a system or sometimes, less so. And for those of us who are engaged in social justice work, it's important for us to remember that there are various lenses to the work. There are various ways in which we understand our vulnerabilities, even as we walk through and move through society. And for us, it's been important to embrace that, to look to that, to ensure that our people who normally are treated as though their lives don't matter or don't matter as much and are left to really live at the margins of society, we're saying, enough of that. Bring folks who are left at the margins, like our trans sisters, bring them to the center. Let's ensure that their voices are heard. Let's ensure that they are protected. Let's ensure that when we build out our campaigns for, if it's campaigns around policing and defunding the police, for example, or when we build out campaigns for transforming, the education system or whatever we do, that we ensure that we're bringing those voices that have been so frequently dismissed. we're bringing their voices and their concerns to the center, and we're fighting from that place. And I think that's the value and the significance when we say intersectionality, and when we talk about ensuring that our movements are intersectional and we appreciate the complexity and the nuance of who we are. You know, I tend to also like to explain and share with folks that what we're essentially are about is by embracing our full selves, right? All of our identities, all of who we are, who we love, the spectrum of our spirit and humanity. And when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we were very intentional from the outset to say that we're talking about all Black lives. We quite literally went to the site and wrote that so that people wouldn't think that we're actually only talking about cisgender Black men, for example. And we're not only just talking about the way in which the criminal justice system works. We're talking about these various institutions that make up our society. And I feel like it's just so important for folks to understand what our heart has been and what it continues to be, because I think there are so many times where you hear it in the media, or you hear different versions of what Black Lives Matter means, or what we stand for, or what we're fighting for, and folks oftentimes miss it. That we are truly standing for and alongside with the breadth of who we are, no matter where we're geographically located, no matter if folks are in prison, no matter if folks are in immigration detention, or if they've been deported, or so on, or if they're poor, and all of these other things that make for easy excuses to dispose of certain type of Black people. We're saying, enough of that. Enough is enough. We're a different type of movement. We're a movement that understands the complexity of who we are, and we're fighting for and championing all of us at the end of the day.
So, Patrice, what has been the role of Black and other LGBTQ plus members of the community and people of color in movements for civil and human rights? I ask this because it is Pride Month, and I think a lot of people don't know historically what has been the role of Black and other people of color in fights for civil and human rights for the LGBT community.
Sorry, I was having a problem with my unmute button. I was getting nervous, like, come on now, don't do this to me. Okay, because I was so focused on unmuting myself, please ask your question again.
Sure. So this is Pride Month.
Yes.
And sometimes I think a lot of people don't understand or know what the role of Black and other LGBTQ people of color in movements for civil and human rights has been. So
Sure.
What has been the role of Black and other
what
people
has it been?
Yeah.
Who are we? There were so many people. This is the part of the talk where I start to just become real Patrice. It's so interesting to me because as someone who came out as queer at a young age and really was trying to find my leaders and find other Black folks who were like me, that was not information that was readily available. And as I started to uncover the archives and started to realize that most of my faves were actually queer and trans, and they were at the front and center of our movement and leading it. They were often the architects of how we understand not just our movement, but the visual of our movements. They were often the artists. They were often the folks that were dreaming and visioning what that new world could look like. And because we, the history of our movements weren't evolved enough at that time to allow for our folks to be open and out, we missed a lot of that history. And I feel like the role that BLM plays is a role that really intervened in this conversation around which kind of Black people were able to fight for Black life. And so, Alicia and I identify as queer, and Opal ends up being lumped into that too, because the two of us, she's like, queer by association. queer adjacent. It's fun. I always love it when I see an article. They're like, and the 3 co-founders of Black Lives Matter are queer. And I'm like, yeah. And Opal never corrects them. She's like, it's fine. Politically queer is a thing as well. You know, I think it's really important because we came out of many Black-led movements who frankly would tell us, you know, we're not going to talk about that issue right now. You know, we're going to actually talk about Blackness right now. And perhaps we'll talk about womanness too. But the queer stuff, that's like what you do in the private. Like, we don't need to talk about that publicly. That doesn't actually change, you know, that doesn't have any real impact. So I think it's been incredibly important to not only be out and proud as Black leaders and Black national leaders. I often hear from younger Black queer folks who are in our movement that we set an example around what was possible. And much of our movement is led, like 90%, by Black queer women. That's just the actual reality. And that's the factual reality of who's at the front lines and who's at the front lines in any city that you go to. And, you know, I think that is been a powerful, it's been powerful to witness it as a queer Black woman. It's been also powerful to be able to have those really important and healing conversations with some of our mentors in our movement that, you know, now have to say we apologize for how we were. And we see you and we see the importance. And so it's so critical to know your history. It's so critical to allow our leaders to be the full human beings that they are, because whether we want to or not, people are watching us and witnessing us and trying to figure out how they then relate as well. And I think we came out with our tattoos and our different hairstyles and our piercings, and we dressed how we wanted to dress. And, you know, there was at the height of the first iteration of BLM, there was a whole conversation about respectability. Mm-hmm. And we weren't going to we weren't going to allow respectability politics to lead how we were going to be in that moment. And I think that has been incredibly important. We didn't feel like we had to button up and sort of like, you know, dress in particular ways and talk in particular ways. We showed up as who we are and who we were. And I know that a lot of our elders who are Black and queer have thanked us personally for that and have had their own healing process because of that. And I think as we have a new generation of young people, you know, evolving around gender and evolving around how they understand the construct that we've lived by. I just want to, like, you know, for all the folks out there, I just want to thank the leadership of young folks who are also either abandoning stuff that we held on to or reimagining new ways to identify themselves in these moments. It's powerful. It's powerful to give space to that evolution. And I'm grateful that we, even though I don't think we were consciously doing it, we were just showing up as who we were, that it gave space to a new type of visibility for Black queer leadership in particular.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So showing up as you are, Alicia, what has been your experiences as Black queer women? I think you're majority on the West Coast, am I correct? So geographically, maybe slightly different from some of the other movements or things like that. How has that shown up with your experiences in leadership with BLM in the fight for civil and human rights?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I mean, to be honest, when we started all this, we were actually on opposite coasts. And, you know, I think each of us has our own kind of story in terms of where we root our Blackness. Mm-hmm. I feel pretty strongly that, you know, what it's been like to show up as our full selves has been scary, and it's been maligned in all kinds of ways. And it has also been incredibly powerful. And so I feel really grateful to be like the smallest unit of this moment, right? Because I think Patrice is right that, frankly, so many people have said, thank you for creating space, right? Thank you for seeing me, and thank you for inspiring me that a movement could hold me, right? In all of myself, not some parts of myself and leave other parts behind, but in all of myself. And you know, Patrice was being very nice when she told the story of people who would act a fool, and who have now had to reckon, right, with that. But I can say, you know, we've all been in those meetings where, you know, I'm now used to being the only Black queer person in a place and trying to figure out, can I be my full self, or do I have to kind of put on some armor here? And walking away from it feeling like, how are we going to get free if we're still doing this, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's interesting because historically, when we look at movements and the people who become valorized within them, everybody celebrates Bayard Rustin now, but nobody was rocking with Bayard Rustin back in the day as a gay man. Like, he couldn't be out. You feel me? Like, right. It just wasn't like that. You know, people want to act like everybody was down with Ella Baker and everybody was down with Fannie Lou and everybody was down with all these folks who we now elevate and lift up. But the fact of the matter is that's not true. And it was only after, right? It was only after and looking in hindsight that people said, oh, yeah, they were really amazing. I don't make that argument so that people can say that about us. I make that argument to say that we really do have an opportunity to make new mistakes. And what happens when we don't create room for people to show up as their full selves is we lose the brilliance, the insight, the foresight, the intelligence, but we also lose the perspective of what actually needs to be transformed in our society. If we are not talking to Black folks who are undocumented, right, then we are going to think that, you know, that the immigrant rights struggle is only about a certain group of immigrants. Mm-hmm. We do not make sure that the voices of trans and gender nonconforming people are front and center, then we are going to continue to think that that the people who are being attacked, right, by the way that we have organized ourselves in this country are only cisgender people. So it's not just about, it's not actually just about diversity or inclusion, right? It is fundamentally about having a different lens through which we see the world so that we can deeply change what is not working for all of us. And I want to say too, just for the record, I have all these feelings about this, right? So yes, here we are in Pride Month. And, you know, I have seen things that people have said about, you know, the struggle for Black lives having colonized Pride Month, as if, right, as if we didn't get Pride because Black and Latinx folks tore it up, you know what I'm saying? And said, we will not be violated and beaten anymore by police. We will not be shoved into shadows in the corners and dumped into trash cans when you're finished with us. We out here, and we're going to be out here. So no, we're not colonizing Pride. In fact, welcome. Right? And then the very, very last thing I want to say on this piece is, you know, there has not been an interview that I've done on television where I haven't gotten an email from somebody very well-meaning who hasn't said, well, couldn't you like wear something different? Or do you have to have your bar in the back of your picture? Or, you know, couldn't you have put on a little more makeup? Now, never mind that what we're talking about is how to stop extinguishing Black lives. We're so concerned with how people look that we're missing the point of the dynamics that are tearing this country apart. And frankly, what is tearing this country apart is that we refuse to afford humanity and dignity to every single human being in this country and on this planet. And that has created a series of deep, deep problems that, again, it is going to take courage and political will to unwind and unfold and to redo. But we can't keep treating this movement or the people in it as symbols or avatars, as opposed to the substance and the engine of what can unlock the promise that this country has claimed to offer people forever.
Mm-hmm. So listen, I could ask you all questions and talk to you forever, but I'm trying to be good, and so I'm gonna throw it to the Q&A. And there's a question that many people have asked, or many iterations of this question, Opal, and it is, how can students, staff, allies who are not Black, how can they fit into this moment to assist with moving the movement forward?
Excellent question. I like to talk about this movement, the broader movement for Black lives, as being a multiracial movement, right? There are all kinds of people who are comprised and committed to this movement. And we need all hands on deck. We need people in their respective vocations and locations to be committed to transforming our world and ensuring that Black lives matter. And that includes students, that includes faculty, that includes all the administrators and beyond. What I would say first is to examine where you are right now, right? So for allies, or we've been trying to move folks right along our understanding around allyship, right? So allies can probably pop in, pop out, join when you want, kind of disconnect. But what we're inviting folks into is to be co-conspirators, if you will, or comrades, being truly committed to the struggle and being invested just as deeply as we are. Black folks take the most risk, right? We were the first ones who are out in the streets. We were the first ones to take our mourning and bring it to the public space. And so we do take the most risk. However, we need our allies, we need our comrades, we need co-conspirators to be just as outraged as we are, just as committed to finding solutions as we are. And what I would recommend is for folks who are students on campus to be in real support of your peers, the other students on campus who are Black, to understand what they're going through, to do the work of supporting them, of showing up when they've asked for you to show up, of ensuring that the school system and that the education system and this university, the campus, if it's virtual or beyond, is one that is safe and affirming of their experience and of their lives. And that might look like a number of things, and I don't know your campus that well, but it might look like ensuring that law enforcement is no longer on the campus. It might look like ensuring that the executive leadership and the administration looks different. It might be ensuring that more people have access to the scholarships. It might be reimagining tuition and that. So there are a number of ways in which people can engage in this work from their respective locations. And I invite folks to really think about this work as though if it was one of your friends, not one of your friends, but one of your children even, let's take it a little bit further. If it was one of your children who was being harmed by the system, what would you do to transform it? And work from that place, right? Work and reflect deeply and commit from a deep place to transforming your campus, to transforming your community, and to transforming the world.
Great, thank you. So Patrice, we're in a moment now, there's unrest, but there's also a pandemic. So what is the role that COVID-19 is playing in this moment that makes it or influences what's happening with respect to protests and the unrest and the movement against Confederate symbols and all of these things?
Well, I'll start with, it's not the disease that has created the conditions that we are in. It's a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades of neglect. It's that we live under a system that has only invested in law enforcement and incarceration, that we have an economy of punishment versus an economy of care. And so we know that because we've seen other countries deal with the pandemic very differently. And we've seen a different result than what we have right now. This result is a result of despair. This result is a result that really comes from a government that has purposefully neglected that it was actually a pandemic, right? Let's remember, 45 called it a conspiracy. There was nothing wrong. And then when he finally had to come to terms that there was an actual pandemic, he himself refused to wear a face mask. And now we're in a dynamic where folks are, unemployment insurance is about to run out. We have people who are at some of the highest unemployment rates ever in the history of this country, where people are homeless. People have lost their homes. And this government has no solution to take care of people. And so the response that we've seen over the last month is actually a very human and natural response to severe dysfunction. We are responding in actually a really humane way, in a really human way to something that is disgusting. So I want us always to be careful of blaming the pandemic, because pandemics happen. Like, scientists have been telling us, like, yeah, there's going to be a pandemic soon, so we should all get ready for it. And let's remember that 45 dissolved the pandemic department, the global pandemic before the pandemic hit. So we are not in this situation because of a global pandemic. We're in this situation because we live under an administration that has purposefully denied and neglected human beings their right for care and dignity.
Thank you. So another question from the Q&A for Alicia, and amen to this person. How can we be sure that the university's racial equity task force doesn't just become a place where good ideas go to die?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Well, the first thing is, I think it's important to push to make sure that that task force isn't just giving recommendations, but that it has some decision-making power. So often, right, we gather people to talk about things that we know are happening and offer solutions that then we give our power over to another entity to decide whether or not they want to implement those solutions. And so I would think it would be important to make sure that as a condition of participating, that one of the commitments, and there should be many, but one of the commitments is that task force is actually making the decision about what is going to be implemented. And then then it actually makes the conversation more rich, right? Nobody wants to sit around a table and talk about what people should be doing, knowing good and well that it's not going to happen, right? So there's that. But the other thing is, it shouldn't be a task force, right? There should be an entire department, at least, that's deeply looking at how do we not only untie the knots of racism and white supremacy and how it shows up in this university, but also what can we do to open the doors, right? So it's twofold. You have to repair the harm that has been done, and you have to remove any further barriers for people to access what should be a basic right for everyone.
Great. So combining a few questions into one on the same theme, how does Black Lives Matter approach reform versus abolition of the police? Opal.
I actually feel like this is a question for Patrice.
Okay.
I don't really I have my views, but I actually feel like that, yeah, Patrice should rock this one out. Like, this is.
Because I answer this question in my sleep.
Okay.
Well, reform is not a bad word. I want to start with that. Reform is not a bad word, but there is a framework in which we can make decisions about the kind of reforms that are going to get us closer to freedom. So when you're thinking about the concept of abolition, and you're thinking of the framework of abolition, and you're thinking about its relationship to reform, they're not oppositional theories. In fact, the way we understand getting closer to abolition is we actually have a term that was coined by critical resistance called non-reformist reforms. And so a non-reformist reform is a reform that does a couple things. One, it's a reform that doesn't grow the state. And so if you're thinking about abolition, and especially the abolition of police and prisons, much of the demands that came out of not Black Lives Matter, but sort of, progressive groups that were really hoping that the police would change their ways were demands like body cameras or more training. Those reforms are actually reforms that give the police more money. They put more money into their budget. So that's not a reform that we would support, and that's not a reform that's actually getting us closer to freedom. So and whenever you're thinking about a reform, you're thinking about what doesn't grow the police or prison state. What are we going to put into place right now that in 150 years from now, we're not going to look back and be like, we probably shouldn't have done that. It's a reform that actually, if we can envision 150 years from now, we actually unlock something that gets rid of an old and archaic way of being. So those are the two ways that you want to think about it. And those are great sort of like starting points, especially if you're, as Opal said earlier, if you have a campaign where you want to demand the university cuts ties with the police, that's a non-reformist reform. That's breaking ties, and that's shrinking the power police have in our lives and in our communities. So it's really important that you're able to differentiate. Sometimes we get very moved by terms and philosophies and theories, and then we want to practice them in their most purest form, but that is not always true or viable. It doesn't mean that you don't create demands that are your dream demands. It just means that the ways that you get to those goals, the ways that you get to those demands have to often be incredibly strategic and nuanced. And so I love this question. I could talk about reform versus abolition all day, but I'll just repeat this by reform is not a bad word. Reforms are not bad. Reforms are tricky though, and we have to be strategic in how we approach the reforms that we are calling for in all moments.
Mm-hmm. So one last question for Opal, and that is, how can student leaders use their platforms to support Black Lives Matter?
Excellent. So student leaders can use their platforms to support BLM by doing the work that is necessary on your campus and in your community. Black Lives Matter is of course, it is the network that we helped to start. It is a platform, but the mandate is much bigger than that. And so the encouragement that I would offer is that students should look to what concerns them, what moves you in your respective location. If it's in the city that you're housed in, or if it's on your campus, make sure that Black Lives Matter is a reality in your field of influence and in the spaces that you have power. And I would encourage that all students get involved in the movement, right? Find your organization. Specifically, that's one of my biggest things that I would want to offer is like, find an organization, get involved, commit yourselves to the movement, right? I think organizational commitment is one of the most critical things that anybody can do. Committing to an organization offers you an opportunity to live your values, to walk the talk, and to be in a community of practice where you're getting feedback. You know, we have been organizing, the three of us have been organizing for, God, like 20 years, or doing some form of advocacy and activism. And we're constantly learning. We're constantly getting feedback. We're constantly being challenged. And so I encourage others to do the same. Be in a community that is committed to the larger goals that the movement has, and be in a position of practice. You know, you're on a campus where you're getting a lot of theory, and that's great. But what's even better than just the awareness that you're getting is actual action and the implementation of those ideas. And the way that you do that is by being in community, is by being in part of an organization where you're able to walk the talk and live your values.
Thank you all so much for this conversation we were able to have. Back to Stephen.
On behalf of everyone here at the University of Florida, thank you all so much, Opal, Patrice, and Alicia. We really appreciate you guys coming to our campus and sharing our message with our UF community. Also, a huge thank you to Dr. McNeely. You guys did a great job, and we couldn't have done it without you. Students, if you're looking for some more virtual programming, SG's Trivia Night will be taking place next at 8 o'clock. So head on over to bit.ly/UF Game Show for the chance to win some cool prizes. And we'll see you later, Gators.